Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Mikhelishvili, your host of the All Out Coach podcast, where leaders share their legacy across different industries. Today, I'm excited about my guest, my friend, former colleague, Dave Giles, full-time father. His last position was National Director at Mallinckrodt of the sales organization. How are you, Dave? How are you
I'm doing
doing?
great. How are you?
Good. It's great to reconnect with you.
It's fantastic.
Considering our social distancing rules and our technology allows us to make this kind of happen in real time. Dave, I'd like to tell everyone first before you tell us about your journey and some of what you've been busy with and inspired with, how I met you. I was first introduced to you when I was new in my career in the pharmaceutical industry at AstraZeneca by my manager. And I had a lot of respect for my manager because I had seen how he impacted others. I had seen firsthand other sales reps early in their career just look up to him, consider him as a leader. So when he told me, and he spoke so fondly to me about you, and when he introduced me at a large meeting, that already was enough. Because for me, the way I look at leadership is you're not a leader until you create other leaders. It was evident that he created leaders, and it was evident that he had a lot of respect for you because you created many leaders. So when I first talked to you, I even remember our first interaction. And even though I was early in my career, you were tremendously authentic, I thought, and just down to earth, which allowed me to think that I could approach you if I had some important issue later on down the line. It was you were very approachable despite your senior role at the company, at large company such as AstraZeneca. So that was my first interaction and impression of you. I'm glad you've made the time here, Dave. And I just want you to begin and take us through your career journey. What were some of the turning points in your career?
Well, before I do that, I just want to thank you first for having me on your podcast, and also say that your description was very humbling. I really appreciate that. I've been blessed with a wonderful career with multiple companies. I've gotten a chance to meet many wonderful people such as you, and I couldn't be more grateful for that at all. And I can tell you, it didn't start out like that at all. I worked my way through college and graduate school selling high-end stereo equipment. I loved it. Never thought I'd do anything else, quite honestly, but there was nowhere else to go in that job. So I went and interviewed with a well-known consulting company, and at the end of the day, the managing partner said, "I'll call you in 2 weeks. Let me know. We'll give you your offer in 2 weeks, and if we don't call you, here's my card. Call me." Great. So I had actually been out on field rides with a couple of reps. One was with Pfizer. One was with I can't remember. I just remember they sold Calan SR, and I saw what they did as drug reps, and I thought, I don't want to do that. That doesn't look very interesting. But anyway, 2 weeks came, and I always tell people, look, be really sure about what you want in life and what you don't want, because you're going to end up with one of the two. Because I decided I didn't want to be a drug rep because everyone else wanted to be one. So anyway, I get this call back, or I called the managing director for the consultancy, and he said, we're not hiring. We're in a hiring freeze. Now, I don't know if you'll remember in the early 90s, went through a little bit of a recession because George W. Bush said no new taxes. But in the middle of an economic downturn, he raised taxes. So not meant as a political comment, more as an economic one. That said, I asked the guy on the phone, the managing director, he and I built a good relationship. I said, if you were me, what would you do? He said, well, you seem like you'd be a good salesperson. And I said, well, okay, what would you sell? He said, I don't know, something really complicated and, something helpful and something expensive, or maybe not expensive, but just, value add. So what would that be? He said, pharmaceuticals. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So anyway, long story short, I had a really good friend who was leaving her job at Merck to go to work for a new company called Astra Merck, which was a joint venture between Astra and Merck. And nobody knew if this thing was gonna work. There were a lot of people leaving Merck, at the time, the most admired company in the US, and going to this little startup called Astra Merck. And I still remember interviewing for Merck, and they were trying to get me to meet their regional director. And I said, I can't go that day. And they're like, why? And I said, well, I have another commitment. And they said, is it an interview? And I said, it is actually. And they said, who's it with? And I asked for Merck. I thought they're Merck, won't matter. And they're like, they started going off on it about how bad it was. And anyway, I went to the interview, and I was immediately impressed by the fact that Astra Merck as a company put culture first. In fact, before they built anything, they built the culture. And I want to give a lot of credit to Matt Emmons, who's subsequently been, in many leadership roles across the industry. But that was Matt's idea. And he was head of sales at the time. That's what he wanted to do, create something really, really different where culture was the first and most important thing. So I remember going to the meeting, the launch meeting. The company never existed before June 1st, 1992, and hearing about their vision for the future. And a part of the vision was that they wanted to change the way the pharmaceutical industry operates. And I was shocked by that. But I have to tell you, when you look at that company, which was like one of the early to do sample send, one of the first to build their own consumer relationship management platform, one of the first to have a really decentralized model with fewer layers, more flat organization, more empowerment. And the people that came out of there, I mean, Matt Emmons, Mike Cola, Kurt Graves, Mark Mallon, you could go on and on. I mean, it was a leadership generator. So I really credit a lot of my own personal desire to create a positive culture from the fact that I started with that company and it made such a huge difference. I was really fortunate there. I was a rep. I was a business manager, which at the time was a really cool job. And then I went to headquarters and led strategic planning and contract management and development, and came out and opened up one of our 6 business units, which were business centers with decentralized model. I ran operations there and then ultimately became a regional sales director. And I was told that I couldn't be a regional sales director at first because they said, you're too analytical. You can't lead people. And I said, okay. But subsequently, I ended up getting the job and really focused on it and focused on leading people. And that was what that job was all about. That's what most any job's all about. But I have to say, we and the team were very successful there, so much so that I was recruited to go to headquarters and work in marketing with AstraZeneca. I did that a few years, then went to Shire, worked in marketing initially, and then global commercial operations, built a new team there, and left, went to the vendor side briefly. I have great respect for everyone on the vendor side. That's a tough job, and they don't always get treated well. So I would ask you, please treat your vendors well. They're working really hard. But then I was recruited to Mallinckrodt, where I built the new neurology team in the new headquarters in New Jersey when they moved from St. Louis. And subsequent to that, after about a year, I became head of sales for the neurology group. And I absolutely loved it. There have been some, as you know, we've had some challenges in our personal lives, and those challenges provided opportunities. And one of them was that I had the opportunity by working with Mallinckrodt, and I can't say enough good things about my manager, Joe Renda, or the HR group there at Mallinckrodt, but we worked together, and I actually was able to leave Mallinckrodt on very mutually favorable terms, so that as of last July, I am now a stay-home dad to my twin sons who just turned 13 and who've been homeschooling since March. So it's actually worked out really, really well.
Yes, and that is a full-time profession, particularly when you consider your roles, your global roles, where you probably didn't have much time to spend with your sons, right? Your children.
Oh my God.
Before.
I tell everybody, it's a lot easier to lead a national sales team of over 100 people than it is to raise 2 boys. It's a lot easier. To your point, Tim, I had spent until about 3.5 years ago, my job was to go out and run my career and lead people and generate results and bring home money for the family. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was still there as a dad, but not as much because I was focusing on that. And then after my wife passed in September of 2016, I was in obviously a totally different place. And we tried out to have a couple of nannies. I tried to continue working. My boys had a couple of challenges though. And I decided that if I was going to say that my legacy was leaving behind 2 wonderful young men, that I needed to focus my priorities and my time on that. And I had to learn a lot. Like I think I told you at one point, my wife managed everything. She managed the house, the boys, the money. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how much money we had or where it was, to be honest with you. Right. She did a very good job, but we didn't really talk about it. So there was a lot there that I would say, there's a lot to learn, and it's not something thought I was going to do, or I thought I was going to be good at. Yeah. So I went to the best people I could find to learn, how do you do this? Because the one thing I knew after that is I have to be the best dad, because I have to be the best parent that my children could possibly have, because that's what they deserve.
Yeah. And leadership is sort of like parenting. I want to talk a little bit about your transitions throughout your career. You've held many different roles. What has been some of the key factors to you moving up, rising in the ranks, having more responsibilities?
It's a really good question. I think the first big transition that anyone has got to make is kind of individual contributor to team leader, because it's no longer about you. It's about how you can inspire, lead, direct, motivate, hold accountable, develop, especially the people on the team to generate the results, because you can't possibly do it from where you sit, right? Yeah. And I think when it comes to that, what I learned is hire the absolute best people you can find, and hire and develop for greatness, and believe that there is greatness in each person. Now, that said, you'll also learn not everybody has the same approach. Not everybody has the same desire for greatness. And you can't, if someone doesn't want to develop, you can't want it more than they do. Is something really important to learn. But I did learn that it really isn't about you anymore. And that was a big deal, because I was used to being a high performer. I knew how I did it. But the way I do it or did it wasn't necessarily what I expected the way someone else would do it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the most important thing. Number one is have great people, treat them well, create a solid culture, lead, motivate, and develop, and focus on the results. And not just the results, because I always like to focus on, like, not what we're doing today, but what that's going to mean. Because I still remember Matt Emmons said about sales reps. He said this at our launch of Astro Merck. I remember he said, we're not in the drug business. We're in the information business, because the information that we provide to prescribers to make decisions to help their patients is really what's the most important thing. It's the decision. And so when I was a sales leader in particular, think about the fact that there are hundreds, thousands, maybe more people you'll never meet. You'll never know. But because of what you can do in inspiring your teams, and what our teams can do in working with our customers, our prescribers, to make good decisions based on risk and benefit, what kind of impact can you have in those people's lives? I mean, how many people are living longer because they got their cholesterol tested and they were treated with Crestor? How many people are avoiding negative consequences of reflux disease with Nexium? How many people's lives have improved because they found their potential, that something may be holding them back, like ADHD, and then they had that treated? A lot of those things wouldn't happen for people if the folks on our teams didn't inspire that to happen. I always think about, what's the ultimate goal? So that's kind of that was a long way of saying it's not about you, it's about your team, right? Good. The second thing I learned is, don't ever try to be something you're not, because you're not that, and you're not going to do well at it.
Be authentic, right? And
it's to your point about authenticity, honestly, because when I went to headquarters, I had been in sales and I went into marketing, and I thought, okay, now I'm in marketing. I have to be a marketer, and I have to work in headquarters. So I have to behave a different way. And candidly, that was bad. Right. It didn't work out well at all, as a matter of fact. And I got really good feedback, and I got really good development. And I figured out, you know what? I've got to bring who I am to this role, not try to be the role. It's about being fully who you are and what contributions you can bring in a role. It's not about you trying to be a role. And I think that's really, really important at every level of leadership, because people aren't looking for someone with a title. People are looking for someone that they can believe in, trust, listen to, and work with.
I like that point very much. I like the way you just described it. I absolutely agree, Dave. Following up on that point of authentic and being authentic, I sometimes wonder, when we have a lot of coaches train and mentor others and tell them, look, got to be authentic, be genuine. Is there a need to also train and mentor on what place someone has on society, on their impact on others? Not everyone's authenticity may have society's impact, their company's benefit, as its primary goal. So how do you train somebody to really assume more responsibility, to think about someone else rather than themselves?
Yeah, I think that really the key to being authentic is to not be inauthentic, if that makes sense. You're not playing a role. You have a role in society. It's very different than playing a role in a stage production, right? You're not out there to look as if you are something. Right. No, you are the role. You have an important role, but be you in that role, right? Mm-hmm. It's about bringing who you are to the table. And some of that is about being completely who you are, being vulnerable. I mean, I've learned it's fine. I don't have all the answers. I've never had all the answers. I've always been upfront to tell people I've never had all the answers. Yeah. And if someone's got a better idea, I'd certainly love to hear it, because we should focus on the outcomes. And again, that kind of goes back to the very first thing. It's not about me. It's about we. It's about the team. It's about what we're trying to do. I think the other piece, though, is around orientation. And it's just, what do you think about what you're doing and what it means? And I love a story of John F. Kennedy went to visit NASA. And this is after he had put forth the great moonshot vision. And he went in and he saw a janitor, and he asked the guy, said, what do you do for a living? And the response was, I'm putting a man on the moon. Right. And I think that's the kind of thought process and the kind of orientation that you really have to have in any job in the company. It's not, it's about the patient. I'll give you an example. I don't want to go into disease states, but I'll give you an example of what we did in analytics when I was at Shire. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of work with rare diseases. There was one particular rare disease that it was primarily in children. It was an enzyme disorder. And just to make it simple, the body lacked this enzyme that removed waste from cells. You think that's pretty basic, right? But think about your house. Like, if you don't take the trash out for a couple of weeks, you're going to have trash bags everywhere. I hope you put it in the trash bag, right? But it accumulates. And the same is true with this disease. What we found was that in that disease state, unfortunately, most of the kids were diagnosed really, really late. And they were diagnosed they were diagnosed after cognitive decline had set in. Mm-hmm. And we actually did a lot of analytics work with a couple of different data companies, and we were able to find a set of other diseases that occurred or may have been misdiagnoses associated with this particular rare disease. And when we started looking into that more closely, we were able to lower the average age of diagnosis of the patients where we targeted with this intervention in those institutions. We were able to lower the age so significantly that those children who were identified and treated at that age were way before the age of cognitive decline. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I used to always talk to the team about, we think it's about the numbers and the data and the math. It's not. It's about there's kids out there living normal lives who would have had cognitive decline if the work that you didn't help find them early enough. Yeah. And that's what I think about. It's like, that's what it means. Whatever job you have, that's what you're shooting for.
That's a great perspective, I think, for many people who may be in our industry or others who may listen to this, who may be critical, let's say, of the pharmaceutical industry. But right now there are 7,000 medications in development, 1% of which only probably makes it. There's so much time, so many resources that are needed to advance the drug development of these products, many of which are so promising and have these kind of patient outcomes like you're talking about. How has the pharmaceutical industry evolved throughout your roles, Dave?
If you don't mind, I want to address one of the facets of what you just said, because this is really important and it's personally important. I just want to share it with you. My wife, we thought, was having panic attacks because she would get nausea and vomiting, and she would flush, and she would sweat, and she would have heart palpitations. And she went to the doctor, and they looked at all of those symptoms, and it was, obvious, for lack of a better term, that she had panic disorder of some type. And so they gave her a treatment for the anxiety and a treatment for the migraine headache. And she was on those episodically for about 7 years. And we noticed these attacks would get a little bit worse, a little bit worse, a little bit worse over time. We didn't know why. And they became more frequent. We didn't know why, but the medicine worked. And that's important, right? The medicine worked. The problem is, I still remember the last time I saw her, she was having one of those attacks. And I said, I closed the curtains, and she said, I'm going to take a nap. The medicine, please give me my migraine medicine. And I did. And I said, we always said this to each other every time we left, because I learned from a mentor of mine in college, you never know when it's the last time you see somebody. And so I still remember, I said to my wife, I love you infinitely and always will. And I hope you feel better. Right? And unfortunately, we came back to the room and she passed. Well, the people at the hospital kept asking, did she have arrhythmias? Did she have some cardiac issue? No, she didn't at all. So we finally got the autopsy back. And I always tell people, if you have to choose a place for your final resting place, don't choose New Jersey, because the bureaucracy is unbelievable. But anyway, we were able to get the autopsy back, and she died of a disease called pheochromocytoma.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're familiar with it, it affects maybe 1 in 250 to 500,000.
Yeah, very rare. Yeah, extremely.
Ultra rare. And it's nothing we would have thought about. It's called the 90% disease. 90% of the people who have it, their families find out at the autopsy, like we did. But if it's identified 90% of the time, the tumor associated with it can be removed and the patient lives a normal life. So one of the things that I'm passionate about is rare disease, because rare diseases aren't rare. There's 7,000 of them. 1 out of every 10 people, check that, 1 out of every 10 people has a rare disease. When we found out how my wife died, one of my neighbors' brother-in-laws has a disease state that can lead to pheochromocytoma. Like it's shocking. So I've actually been working with a number of different companies and with the FDA and to try to put in place a protocol, instead of immediately jumping to a panic diagnosis, screen for pheochromocytoma. And it's an inexpensive blood test or urine test. And, and that's my story. But to me, that's the power of what the industry does for good, is helping to identify patients when something can be done, not after it can't be done, right? And I think a lot of the industry, disease state awareness ads, things like that, I don't know that we give the industry enough credit for public health. And I think that we should focus more on that, because I think the industry does an outstanding job of that.
Thank you so much for sharing this personal story, Dave. And, this is what I like to evoke. I want to evoke emotions out of people who come on my show and people whom I know for a long time. And actually, it just so happens that this tragedy in your family is the one that reconnected us, because as soon as I heard about it, I remember contacting you, because it was just knowing how young you are, your young family and everything like that. It was very disheartening and just very sad when I heard about it. But it's so great to hear that you're really extending your legacy and extending the boundaries of your legacy and what you can do to help so many other people's lives, and you're continuing to be just very active in your community, in healthcare, and you're staying very strong as a father, as a leader. So
what motivates me about this is I know what it means. And if we can, in fact, we did an early intervention working with an inside sales company. And one of the doctors who ended up getting on the phone with one of the agents after they talked about the disease The doctor said, "Are you with the drug company? What are you trying to sell?" I said, "We're not selling anything. We're just raising awareness of this." I said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." The doctor said, "This is one of the best things I've ever heard. I wouldn't have thought about that. I actually think I have a patient who may have that."
Yeah.
And if I always look at it is if we can help one family to avoid that, right? One family, it's worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Before I kind of ask you to also address the other side, right? And be a little bit critical, kind of push the boundaries a little bit about our industry that we share our experiences in. I want to ask you about the mentors that you've had. Just if you can tell us a little bit more about particular mentors throughout your transitions in your career, or advice or relationships that you've formed, because I know how strongly you feel about relationships.
yeah, actually, I want to take a minute and talk about someone I think was probably one of my most important mentors, if not the most important, one of my closest friends, and in his honor, because he has since passed away,
Sure.
And that's Vic McKee. And Vic McKee was a sales leader at Astra Merck, at AstraZeneca, and he became the customer center leader when we built the Nashville Business Center, the Nashville Customer Center. And I had the opportunity to work side by side with him in leading the operations team and working very, very closely with Vic. And I have to say that Vic was the most warm and genuine and authentic individual that I've ever met. And I was a young, ambitious, workaholic, crazy guy to get everything done and move as fast as I possibly could. And Vic was the person who helped me understand the importance of relationships. And that actually is the most important thing in my career. And I have to say, he's the one who basically was like, slow down, don't think about what you're doing. Think about what's going to happen. Think about what it's going to cost. And he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he told all sorts of stories and almost like parables. And you could remember with Vic. And I can tell you that there's not a person that knew him that was not impacted by him in a very positive way. Not one. And there are probably hundreds of people who would say that their most important mentor was Vic McKee. Right. And Vic was actually my deployed leader when I had ended up getting a role as a sales leader. And I don't think I could have done that without Vic, because he's the one who really helped me understand a lot about leadership of anyone, but especially about leading sales teams. I would say the same of Doug McNamee. Doug was a wonderful leader. There was a time in my career, and a controversial character, but a guy that I learned a lot from, Mike Tilton. Mike's got his own unique way.
He headed up the entire cardiovascular franchise, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, but I like Mike, and Mike was a brilliant guy, and I learned a lot from Mike as well. And then I would say in my most recent role, a couple of people. One was Hugh O'Neill, who was the head of our group, and the other was my direct boss, who was Joe Renda. And Joe was really an amazing leader, a very empathetic human, and I learned a tremendous amount from him. And I don't want to leave out Marianne Jackson, because Marianne is the one who hired me into global commercial ops at Shire and was incredible in that way. The story I was telling you about, Marianne had a sales background, primarily sales and marketing, some operations, but she was put in charge of the whole operations team. I was leading Salesforce effectiveness in the US and global data management. And I ended up going into the office of one of the sales ops guys one day. And I closed the door and I just said, "Hey, how you doing?" And he got really suspicious. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Why do you want to know that?" I'm like, "I just want to know how you're doing." And he said, "Well, Marianne was here yesterday and she asked me the same thing." And I said, "Okay." He said, "You guys were both in sales at one point, weren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." "What do you mean?" He said, "Dave, I've been doing this job for 20 years and no one has ever asked me, how am I doing?"
Right. It's unbelievable.
And,
to the culture and to the reality of our corporate environment and our business.
Right. How are you doing? And I think that's a big, big deal.
Empathy. I often wondered about empathy, and empathy is probably not something you can teach, you can learn. It can only probably be modeled through behavior and just something that it can be experienced. Thank
People
you.
don't know that you're real and that you care. And what is the saying? People don't care what you know until they know that you care. I mean,
Yeah.
I know. but it's true. I mean, it really is true.
If we talk about some of the social media relationships that are formed now, you told me a long time ago how important it was to have a LinkedIn presence, then to have a lot of quality relationships and network. And I'm only realizing that most recently, where I'm very active on LinkedIn. Now, how do you really convert those real relationships into virtual relationships now? How are you doing that? Are there any tips that you have?
Yeah, I would say, LinkedIn is an amazing resource. I have been on LinkedIn since 2007, and I love it. And it's meant a lot to me in being able to create and sustain relationships. I think that's really the key. I mean, people in this industry move around so much. I heard someone once call it a virtual Rolodex. And if that's all you use it for, that's just it, then that's great, because at least you can keep up with people and where they are and what they're doing. I also look at it sometimes as a news source. I think they have good news feeds. And I look at it when I'm trying to, connect with someone on any level. I have a personal story about LinkedIn, if you don't mind. I can share. So this past summer, I was traveling with the boys. We were in Los Angeles, and I had the American Express app came up. And I had transferred some money into my personal checking account because I was having work done at my house that wouldn't ordinarily have been there. And so I needed to pay my American Express bill. And I was in this hotel, and I got on the American Express app, and I opened it up. And I'll just say it was a very big bill. Biggest bill I ever had with American Express. Biggest by far. So we were on our way to Universal. I said, I want to get this thing paid so it's out of the way. I don't have to worry about it. So I go on LinkedIn, and I am sitting at breakfast with the boys, and I press pay. And nothing came back. And so I didn't think it worked. So I turned it off, and I let it go, and I checked my email. I didn't get a confirmation. I didn't know. So I opened it up a little bit later. Didn't look as though it had actually processed or been paid. I pressed pay again. Again, same thing. Nothing happened. So I let it go for a while. We go back to the room. The boys are getting ready in a hurry. And then hurriedly, I just opened it up and hit pay again. And then I went to Universal and had a great time. The next morning, I woke up really early, and I thought, I wonder if that went through 3 times. And I opened up my email, and I had 3 confirmations from Amex. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I went on their chat feature, not helpful. I went on there, I called them, not helpful. I went on LinkedIn. I found the global senior vice president of customer service for American Express. I sent him a very short note, told him the situation. He got back to me and said, we will take care of it. That afternoon, I got a call from his admin. And she said, we are taking care of your situation. Because of the amount, it's got to go through multiple levels of approval before we can debit it back to you or credit it back to you. I said, that's fine. And she said, if it doesn't happen by this time, let me know. Okay, thank you. The next morning, I get a call from a guy, and he said, everything should be okay now. And I said, yeah, it is. It's all checked in. It's all back in my account, my checking account. Thank you. And I apologize. And he said, just wanted to let you know that on our floor, like our customer service floor, everyone knew that today's most important priority was getting your money back to you. Yeah. And I was like amazed at this. So the lady, the admin, called me back. Actually, I think she was chief of staff. Now that I think about it, she called me back and said, "Did it work out?" And I said, "Yes, it did." And let me recognize some people. And so to her, I recognized all the people in that call center who had helped me, and said, thank you. And then I sent her an email with all of their names, thanking them for their outstanding service. And then I sent a note back to the global senior vice president of customer service at American Express on LinkedIn. And I said, I would like to recognize first, this was my fault. And I acknowledge that. Secondly, in business, a lot of the times it's not that something went wrong. It's how do you respond, right? And I said, I've never been more pleased with the response than yours. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank the following individuals for the following things that they did. And I listed every name of every person I dealt with and exactly what they did to bring it all together. And I sent it to him and he sent me back a thank you note. But I've never seen the guy in my life. But it was amazing. LinkedIn, I mean, it's, personal situation, but you can really connect with people. And the other thing is I get recruiter calls from LinkedIn all the time. I'm sure everyone does.
Sure.
I'm not looking for a job. I have a job, full-time dad. But you'd be shocked at how often I will say, well, what else are you recruiting for? And let me see if I can help you. And I will then connect those people with other people in my network to try to figure out if there are other connections that can be made. So there are lots of things like that. LinkedIn has their own statistics that show the connection that gets most people most jobs using LinkedIn is a third-degree connection.
Yeah, not even first or second. Yeah, wow.
Think about that.
Statistic.
It's not who you know or who they know, it's who they know that helps most people. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this was an amazing story that you told, because I think there are two lessons here, how important LinkedIn is in developing relationships and meaningful relationships. And then the second one, I think, for me, is the story of generosity. Just your reaction is one that was just, to me, was very memorable here, that I think many listeners can learn from, because you really didn't have to go out of your way and to recognize everyone, but you made sure to do that. And then just like he didn't really have to necessarily go to great lengths, right, to investigate and make sure that you were a happy and satisfied customer. I've done similar things at T-Mobile where I've recommended people when they've gone out of their way to help me, without their asking to. I had this one LinkedIn challenge that I started recently where I urged LinkedIn users in my network, my friends, to recommend someone publicly without their asking them. It was my LinkedIn challenge. And this is why I actually changed my tagline and my description on LinkedIn, adding energy, excitement, and character, one relationship at a time.
I love it.
Because it's truly my focus now. Because you can't really go after all those thousands of relationships, but if you make one change in somebody's life, like the one you described, it's a sign of, I think, a legacy, being responsible to our community, our society at large.
I think a lot of the times we think about legacy as if it is a word that is in all caps and it's chiseled into a fine piece of granite somewhere on the top of a pedestal. Yeah. That's the capital L legacy. Like I'm Bill and Melinda Gates, and I'm leaving behind the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Yeah, it's something like as if it were to happen sometime at the end of life, right? Only.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's unattainable to most people. Like it's just, you couldn't leave a legacy. What I would say though is think about the little L legacy. Think about the people that you've had an impact on you never even thought about. That's people's legacies. That's the difference that you make. And you and I talked about this from a leadership perspective. I always say, one thing that the best bosses in the world and the worst bosses in the world have in common is this. They're both talked about at the dinner table. Yeah. Now, they're talked about very differently, right? But they're talked about. Think about the impact as a great boss you have on someone, given that employee energy, inspiration, direction, guidance, motivation, purpose, recognition, and they go home and they tell their family about what a great day they had and the people that they helped and how great it is to work with these people, right? As opposed to someone who's oppressed or beaten down or circumvented or not respected or talked over in meetings, and they go home feeling smaller than they did when they left. Yeah. And that has an impact on their family too, right? So I've always said, I think as leaders, we need to acknowledge it doesn't matter what your level is. In fact, I think it's not just about leadership, it's about working with people. everything you do, to your point about adding energy, one relationship at a time, that's exactly what life's all about. It's exactly what we should be tuned into doing. I love it.
Yeah.